Is Yo Oliver coming to you on the 11th of May 2020, the 17th of the month of Iyar. So, we are living through a massive worldwide hoax, or you could call it a false flag operation. Those two are slightly different, but in some ways this is a hoax because the a hoax is a situation in which we're told that a dramatic disaster happened, but it never happened. So, to some extent, these we're being literally lied to about what happened. We're being lied about the statistics, lied to about the incidence of the uh, cases, infections, and lied to about the number of deaths. So in that sense, it's a hoax. It's also a false flag operation in the sense that there is actual events taking place that are causing mass hysteria. So the number of deaths, for example, in New York, in the hospitals, that is actually happening, that people are dying en masse in the hospitals, but not because of COVID-19, but because they're being murdered by the nurses and the doctors and the policies of the administrators. So in that sense, it's a false flag operation. Either way, this is a mind control operation of an unprecedented scale, and it has been planned in great detail. We must understand such an event didn't wasn't patched together in a few weeks. It certainly was planned for many years. The idea of using a pandemic as a tool for a power grab, a takeover of the world for the sake of the New World Order, this scenario has been researched and refined certainly for many decades. And this particular event certainly has been prepared in great detail, and it has been planned for many years. Obviously, we don't know the details, but certainly we can assume that this, in no way, the events we're seeing are just chance reactions to, um, to events on the ground. Now, the media is completely controlled by the CIA, by the intelligence organizations, not entirely, but almost completely controlled. And therefore, anything we see in the media, and especially from politicians in general, we can assume to be uh, fed to us in order to promote a certain narrative. Official sources are always about propaganda in order to control us. So before we were told that we need to stay home because coming into contact with other people will spread the disease. So we need to stay home in order to minimize contact with other people, and therefore we will mitigate the spread of the disease, and therefore it won't spread as quickly, and therefore the hospitals won't be overwhelmed. That was the narrative we were brainwashed with. Stay home, save lives. Stay home, it could save lives, and so on. But now, just recently, the narrative has changed completely. Of course, instead of admitting that they were wrong, what the government does is just saying, oh, we made a mistake. They can always cover up their deception through claiming that they meant well and that therefore they don't need to be held responsible for the gross obscenely harmful quote unquote mistakes they made before. So, what are we now being told? That according to these new statistics that are coming out, supposedly, most people were infected with COVID 19 while they were at home and not while they were outside. This was reported to us on May the 6th in the mainstream media. In particular, with regard to New York, the vast majority of New Yorkers still walking into hospitals with COVID 19 have been sheltering at home and avoiding mass transit. Very few were even traveling on foot or in their own cars on a daily basis, according to a survey of new patients from over 100 hospitals across the state over a 3-day span. Of those surveyed, 66% were at home before entering the hospital. Governor Andrew Cuomo, this disgusting swamp creature, who presented the preliminary findings on Wednesday, said they underscore the need for people to double down on protecting themselves and their families with things like masks, hand washing, and staying away from the most vulnerable. Well, how is that logical? Because if the infections took place while they were staying at home, that would imply, apparently, that none of these measures are successful, are effective. Well, no. Really, that is being used to justify even more paranoia, even more obsessive following of these ridiculous distancing measures, because you never know how it could spread. Even if you're at home, you could be vulnerable. So therefore, even in your house, you need to be paranoid, in great fear of catching the dreaded disease by touching anything in your house. Right? So that's the way this lowlife is spinning this. Quote, "We were thinking that maybe we were going to find a higher percentage of essential employees were getting sick because they were going to work. That this maybe was nurses, doctors, transit workers. That's not the case," Cuomo said. "Some 83% of new patients are out of work or retired and aren't even leaving the home on a daily basis. This is a surprise. Overwhelmingly, the people were at home," he added. Right. Well, why would Cuomo, who represents the deep state, come out with such a complete 180 from the previous narrative? Why would they put out this narrative? What is the hidden agenda behind it? It completely contradicts the stay-at-home narrative, if you just think about it for a moment. It might even imply that people should overcome this alleged pandemic by specifically not staying at home, by leaving the home. So what is going on? So to me, the answer is clear. These tyrants are looking for the excuse, the cover, to implement the next phase of this grand mind control operation. This rollout of the police state under the guise of protecting us. This medical martial law. What is this next phase? This phase does not involve people secluding themselves, but the next phase is people not secluding themselves, but being in constant fear of unintentionally coming into contact with someone who is infected and for whom the contact tracing technology is being used, so that person will now cause me, I'm just walking down the street or I'm just sitting nearby in a restaurant, to be to get a visit from the Gestapo, the medical martial law Gestapo, and be told to isolate or be separated from my family if there's only one bathroom in the house. So this is reported increasingly in recent over the past week or so. This is a report from, I'm reading out from Forbes on April 30. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, right? So around the same time, the same Cuomo is coming out with contact tracing laws. He said in a Thursday press conference that the state will hire thousands of contact tracers. Contact tracers. That sounds so benign, so worthy. Contact tracers who notify people who have been exposed to COVID-19 as part of the system being developed to help the state return to everyday life. Yeah, sure. You can have your normalcy if you submit to a complete violation of your rights, which you had before during the lockdown. During the lockdown, people had the right to not have their home invaded and be separated from their family. But now, the police state is being taken to a whole new level. Quote, is all as part of the system being developed to help the state return to everyday life as coronavirus hospitalizations and deaths continue to decline. Right? Well, if they're declining, then why do we need harsh measures? Got to wonder. Key facts. Between 6,400 and 17,000 tracers will be hired based on projected cases, right? So a mass army of taxpayer-funded Gestapo is being recruited right now. The contact tracing system is being developed in partnership with former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, another deep state actor, who pledged $10 million to help fund the effort. $10 million taxpayer money. $10 million of taxpayer money, and Johns Hopkins University. Cuomo said New York is creating the contact tracing playbook. Well, that's a good word. That will be shared with New Jersey and Connecticut. Yeah, of course, it won't be limited to one state. This will be rolled out throughout the United States and the world. In order to become a contact tracer, people will need to go through training and pass an online exam, Cuomo said. Contact tracing will be a three-step process. After a person tests positive, with the tests that are completely faulty and don't test for coronavirus, COVID-19 at all, but only for perhaps for coronavirus in general, and have a very high rate of false positives. Quote, they will be interviewed about contacts from the previous 14 days, right? So they'll be interrogated about everyone who could possibly have come into contact with them, and they will be put in a position of informing on those people, even though there's no proof that those contacts got the disease from them. Then those contacts will be isolated for 14 days, according to Cuomo. New York City alone is hiring 1,000 contact tracers with a healthcare background. Oh, this must be from all those nurses and healthcare workers who were furloughed from their positions because the hospitals were emptied out of anyone who wasn't dealing with COVID-19. So this will be their new job. We can see just how ethical and moral all these healthcare workers are, or many of them are, if they're willing to do such a dirty, filthy job. New York City alone is hiring 1,000 contact tracers with a quote-unquote healthcare background, said Mayor Bill de Blasio, who joined Cuomo's press conference via video call. How can we begin to loosen these restrictions and begin reopening the economy? Asked Bloomberg during the press conference via video chat. One of the most important steps we have to take to reopen the economy as safely as possible is to create a system of contact tracing. When social distancing is relaxed, contact tracing is our best hope for isolating the virus when it appears and keeping it isolated. Social distancing is relaxed. Yeah, you can bet people will be uh, truly, deeply scared of coming near any other citizens under the contact tracing regime, which will clearly be going on indefinitely for many, many months. Um, the law has been passed. I saw a law in a bill in California that I believe was passed, and for the federal law that was suggested wasn't passed yet, but vast amounts of taxpayer money throughout America are going to be going and already going to training this army of contact tracers for many, many months to come. So this is the philosophy of divide and conquer on steroids compared to the previous measures of social distancing and lockdowns and uh, face masks. This is far, far worse than the previous measures, but that's only understandable. It, it was never going to get better. It was always going to get worse. One oppressive measure was always meant to lead to another worse one. And you can bet that these contact tracing Gestapo operatives will be enforcing a vaccine. They will go house to house and enforce a vaccine on every single person who refuses to take the vaccine. I see that as a likely scenario. I hope it doesn't come true. But once the people accept this regime of these this invasion of privacy, which is a violation of the Fourth Amendment against uh, uh, searching someone's house without a warrant, once this becomes a new normal, then the next step will be enforcement of the mandatory adult COVID-19 vaccine. This is self-enslavement. Um, the self-enslavement here is for anyone who is foolish enough to download the COVID-19 tracing app voluntarily. Let's talk now about how updates of Apple iPhones and of Android phones will contain the tracing app, and I'm not sure whether there's a way of opting out of that, of deactivating that. But certainly, if you're actively downloading a contact tracing app, whatever country you may be, I mean, you almost deserve to be taken away and put in isolation or in a FEMA camp by these commie operatives. I mean, how foolish, how naive do you have to be to trust a government to trace your every move and your contacts with other people and still fall for this propaganda that there's a serious health crisis even after the hospitalizations and the deaths have dramatically declined. How much of a fool do you have to be? So if you do download the app, then it's hard to have pity on you if you are then detained and arrested, taken to an undisclosed location. It's just irrational to invite the government to spy on you. And if you just think about it logically, you have everything to gain uh, by refusing, and you have nothing to lose. There's nothing to gain. Uh, if you have coronavirus, it's 99.9% likely that you'll recover. And if you share it with someone else, well, it's 99.9% likely that they'll recover. And you know what? Every single year, this is the case that people might be carrying diseases and they might share them with other people, and society goes on as normal. So therefore, um, on a personal level, there's absolutely no logic in downloading this app and submitting to this totalitarian regime, all in the name of safety and health. Another point here is that there's an implication here that if you are not downloading this app, then the government is not tracing you and is not following your every move. That is also a mistake. We are already being traced and followed and recorded by our smartphones. Thank God I don't have a smartphone, I have this, but I understand to some extent this can still trace my movements, but I think not as much as a smartphone. In any case, probably better to ditch all the phones. At least this phone, you can actually take the battery out. These old phones. Also, Android phones, you can take the battery out. That's something, whereas iPhones, you can't even take the battery out of. You can turn them off, but they could still be functioning. I know that sounds crazy, even when they're off. Perhaps when they're dead, they're completely out of battery. Perhaps then they're not tracing you and recording you. But really, these smartphones are much more trouble than they're worth. They are the tools, one of the many tools in the arsenal of the growing national security police state. You can be spied upon if you have a cell phone, and it doesn't help to disable the COVID-19 tracing app. It doesn't help to do that. Another thing possible to do is by wrapping it. I understand, I hear, I haven't researched this, wrapping your phone in aluminum foil, in addition to removing the battery. Okay. Now, we should hope that this dramatic, new, harsh measure should wake up all those naive, gullible sheeple who still sincerely think that the lockdowns were necessary, that social distancing is necessary, that face masks are necessary, that the government means our best interest. What is the logic in this massive taxpayer-funded program of invading people's houses because they come into contact with someone who was tested positive for COVID-19, even if that person was completely healthy, because you can be test positive and supposedly have COVID-19 even if you're completely healthy or have barely any symptoms or no symptoms, and still you have to be isolated, and anyone who came into contact with who is also completely healthy also has to be isolated, all because of a faulty test. How can you still believe this narrative once you see this dramatic expansion of the police state? How can you? It, the the government, the deep state is testing our response over here. Will we fall for this grand deception? Will we tolerate this invasion of our privacy, this deprivation of our basic rights, this violation, gross violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, which is supposedly the supreme law of the land, at least in America, and similar principles apply in other Anglo countries based on English common law? Why would we tolerate such an invasion of our privacy? The answer is we've been so traumatized by the trauma-based mind control of this pandemic that now we're willing to submit to the next phase of deprivation of our rights, of rollout of the police state. And of course, this is all a precursor to the end game of this evil cabal, which is mandatory adult vaccines and a microchip. God forbid. So, I hope this is a wake-up call. I somehow doubt that those people who are still asleep will wake up, but I hope they will. I hope they'll come to their senses and realize that this is really very fishy. They can't trust the government, and they certainly should not download this app. And we should hear good news. Thanks for listening. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel.
Don't believe the church and state.